Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. In this episode, I am joined by Emily Frase. Emily is a wife and mom of two. She has a fantastic blog called Total Wine, and she just co-founded a new organization called Fambase. Links to all of those are going to be in the show notes. Emily and I spend a good portion of time talking about why NFP is not Catholic birth control. Let's get started. All right. Well, welcome, Emily. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be on.
Well, can you just start by introing just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So my credential list is, about a sentence long. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And about 3 years ago, I started blogging about, actually, if you scroll back far enough in my blog, I was just thinking about this recently. You will actually find like a recipe for a steak salad. So needless to say, things have taken a little bit of a shift change over time, and I'm totally cool with it. But I just started kind of sharing my own personal experience and story with NFP, the ups and downs, the struggles, and was just not gonna sugarcoat it at all. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm not the only one who's got issues with NFP. So let's talk about it. And so everything just kind of took off from there. And then that actually kind of, opening up about my own struggles actually helped me in the healing process. And then through that healing process, I was then able to turn it into something constructive as well. So that's kind of where I am now. I just recently, I'm actually in the process of starting a 501c3 that's going to be more kind of taking what I'm doing right now and just, turning it up to 11. I've got a partner, Mary Bruno, who started taking back the terms. And so she and I are going full core on this. We're very excited. It's basically going to be all of the fertility awareness information that we kind of wish that we had, putting it at people's fingertips. We're going to be focusing on people's stories across all different, reproductive stages, ages. We're going to talk to teens. We're going to talk to the men. Let's get the men's voices in this conversation as well. So I mean, we have so many ideas. There's no way that I could encapsulate it, but anyway, I can go ahead and tell you, because we'll be announcing this on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. I think this episode will air after. The name of the organization is going to be Fambase. So you heard it first.
I love it.
So the fertility awareness database is essentially kind of what we're going with. But yeah, Fambase. And so big things coming. We're very excited. And but it all started. Yeah, it all just started really, really small and then just kind of snowballed one little thing after another. And
isn't that often how God works in our lives, though? He just throws a little, adds to the snowball, makes it bigger. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm rolling down a hill and going so fast. How did this happen?
It's so funny because literally this afternoon when I was thinking about it, I was like, that's exactly the analogy I was thinking, because it was just one little yes at a time, but it snowballed, It's just, it totally just amplified and turned into this big thing. So
that is amazing. Well, I'm so excited for that organization. I've been following you along as you've been dropping little hints on your Instagram. And I'm just I'm so excited. I'm excited to see where it's going to go. All right. So jumping into today's topic, I am so passionate about this. And I think you are too, because where this came from was actually a bit of a Instagram stories, amazing rant that you had. And I was just...
Isn't it great that somebody's like, yeah, I just love that rant that you went on.
I really did. I feel like I just fell in love with you more as a person, because I was like, wow, she's saying the words I wish I could say. But anyway, I'll stop beating around the bush on this. But okay, why is NFP not Catholic birth control?
Yeah. So what I want to do is I kind of want to frame this conversation by addressing why this even became a question to begin with. And if you talk to people who say that NFP is Catholic contraception, you'll eventually wind up at this place where you find out that they are very uncomfortable with Vatican II. They will constantly tell you that something like canon law was changed and we need to go back to the 1917 version of canon law. They have big issues. I've spoken to one of these people before, and they just point blank said that St. Pope Paul VI was not their favorite pope. And of course, he wrote Humanae Vitae. So I mean, it's an interesting conversation. And frankly, it's a troubling conversation, but I did want to just address kind of these issues that were raised. Okay, there was a 1917 version of canon law. When I first heard this, I was like, wait, does that mean that church teaching changed? And so as I started diving into this issue, it was really just kind of like, it was very much like, what is the truth? And I was worried. I was like, oh my gosh, are we wrong? Like,
sure. I mean, it's a valid question to ask yourself. Like, wait a second, like, am I doing something wrong here?
Right. And so and I think it kind of stems from a healthy place that can go south really quickly, but it's a healthy place of saying that, we recognize the problems of modernity, right? That we, in modern times, we're dealing with really big problems. And a lot of people see that the shift in the church, they identify it as Vatican II, that's where, we started to lose belief in the Eucharist, for example, and, something like that. They tend to be, they don't like the Novus Ordo. But if you actually go back to Vatican II documents, the only thing that changed was now you can say the Mass in the vernacular. The taking down of altar rails and the priest facing the people instead of facing the tabernacle, moving the tabernacle, all of those things were just kind of like on the spot, like, well, we're just going to do this now. That's not in the documents. None of that was in the documents.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Oh my gosh.
Right. So like when you go back to Vatican II and you act like, I have not read the documents, but I've talked to very good priests who have read the documents. Sure. And they're like, there's nothing in there that changes church teaching, that alters church teaching. The only thing that changed with the Novus Ordo was now you can say Mass in the vernacular. That's literally it.
Wow.
Okay. So all of these other abuses that you see happening are just kind of like, that's something else that was going on, essentially. Sure. That's priests making, decisions, not from Vatican II, essentially. But anyway, so of course, Humanae Vitae also came out of Vatican II as well. And there, so all of these ideas about, Humanae Vitae is tackling the birth control question, right? We now have hormonal birth control that is available on demand. This is a huge problem, and we haven't seen it on this level in the entire history of the world up to this point. So how do we address this? So the other thing is with the Council of Vatican II, it was called for reasons that have never been or were different reasons than councils have been called for historically. Historically, councils were called in direct response to a heresy. Vatican II was the first kind of proactive council that's ever been called. There wasn't a direct heresy they were addressing. It was, there's this huge problem of modernity, and we need to basically kind of do a revamp, a marketing revamp, essentially. I'm doing a very poor job of explaining it, but like, how do we communicate the church in this world? Things have changed dramatically, and our approach has to change. And that's really where the spirit of Vatican II came from. And so what you see is that the people, kind of like the rad trad crowd, that type of thing, that's very troubling to them. And it's understandable to a certain point, but then you have to go back to Christ himself, right? He kind of did the same thing. He was like, I did not come to abolish the law. I came to establish it in love. Right. And so Vatican II, I think, is very much in that same spirit of these are different times. We're in a different place. The law doesn't change, but the way we communicate it has to. Yeah. Because we're encountering different problems in a different way. So in 1983, canon law got a total revamp. And the last time that it was changed was in 1917. So it's very important to understand too that canon law has changed constantly over the course, like since it's been in existence.
Right.
The last time there was a complete overhaul was in 1983, right? Which is of course post-Vatican II, which is of course therefore extremely problematic. So what happens is, so in the 1917 version of canon law, it said that procreation is the primary purpose of marriage. And I'll go ahead and pull it up. I've got it right here. In the 1983 version of canon law, it's restated to say the matrimonial covenant by which a man and a woman establish between themselves a partnership of the whole of life, and which is ordered by its nature to the good of the spouses and the procreation education of offspring, has been raised by Christ the Lord to the dignity of a sacrament between the baptized. Now, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we kind of go a little bit deeper. I'm not going to read, I'm not going to read it more, but you can see that the language definitely changed.
Right.
And that union and procreation are now dually primary. And so what happens is the folks who say that NFP is Catholic birth control are basically saying that there is no valid reason to avoid a pregnancy unless you're dying, because the primary purpose of marriage is procreation. They go back to that 1917 translation of canon law, or version of canon law.
Yeah.
It's very important to understand that even in recent history, canon law has kind of had line item changes. Pope Benedict, Pope John Paul II, Pope Francis, they've all kind of done line item changes on different sections of canon law. Basically, not changing church teaching. It's very important to understand. You're not changing church teaching. Often what is happening is it's clarifying church teaching, or, having to adjust the way that it's communicated based on, a current event. I know most recently, one of the things that happened was canon law got changed once all of the sexual abuses started to arise. They had to go back and change something in canon law so that could be treated, more seriously, essentially.
Well, yeah. And there's just, it happens in language, like words change meaning colloquially. Exactly. And so therefore, like canon law would have to be modified to explain, what they mean by that phrase that maybe made perfect sense in, the 1700s or something, 1800s, right? But doesn't make sense colloquially anymore, or doesn't have the same understanding.
Exactly. And it's really important too to understand that union and procreation have always been dually primary. I actually had some people reach out to me and explain that the language in 1917, in the 1917 Code of Canon Law, saying that procreation is the primary purpose, the way that it was worded, it's actually like primary doesn't mean first and foremost and only. And I forget exactly how they explained it, and I should have looked at it before I came on and started recording with you, but oh well. But it wasn't saying that it was the only purpose of marriage, or that it subverted union, because think about it. It makes no logical sense if you have procreation without union, right? Like that makes no logical sense whatsoever.
Well,
because it's not just about making a baby. It's about raising that baby and educating that baby. And we know that you need a husband and a wife who are united in order to bring that about in the best way possible, right? Exactly. So it's not just about pumping out kids. It's about raising them right and making sure that they grow up in a home with a good, loving marriage.
Right. And that's where responsible parenthood comes in. Is sure, for some people, for some situations, responsible parenthood might mean having as many kids as they can because they have incredible resources and they have, a village around them to help raise those children. And that's fantastic if that's your situation. But in the modern world, that's very few people's situation. I mean, we live in small apartments in cities, and you can't fit more than like 2 or 3 kids in a small apartment. I mean, you might be bursting at the seams with one.
Right.
Two people have to work.
Well, and it's even,
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. No, but I mean, even if like, you could argue like even with the apartments, historically we have seen such a shift in the way that we interact with other people, right? Before we moved into this house that we're in now, we were living in a 750 square foot apartment with 2 kids. It was miserable, but it wasn't just miserable because we were in a tiny space. It was miserable because we didn't know our neighbors.
Yeah.
And there was actually hostile relationships with our neighbors, right? So I mean, it's like a total shift. Like if you had this sense of community and leaning on the people around you, even if they aren't family, we've really lost that. And I mean, we could write books about how we need to get it back and why, what we need to do. But anyway, I don't want to go on a tangent there, but you're absolutely right, is that this is a modern problem, and responsible parenthood is something that is so misunderstood, because you're absolutely right. For some people, that means having 10 children. Right. But that's not necessarily for everybody. And I would say too, that the people who, are called to have 10 children and don't, that's highly irresponsible, right? It has to be a yes to God in every single moment. And that is the beauty of fertility awareness, is because all NFP is fertility awareness plus discernment. That's it. Exactly. There is absolutely no contraceptive measure. I don't even understand how you can call it that, because when you start learning fertility awareness and you learn how important ovulation is to a woman's overall health, like all of the things that take place to coordinate ovulation, and then all of the things that a woman gets from having ovulated, like fertility awareness is actually very pro-conception, right? Because we understand through this study that suppressing ovulation is highly detrimental to a woman's health, and we want to optimize ovulation, not just to achieve pregnancy, but to achieve her health. Right. So it's the opposite of contraception. It's like, no, we want to make you as fertile as possible, because that means you're healthy.
Exactly. Well, and yeah, I mean, just the word contraception, it means against conception.
Right.
And that would mean that there would have to be something physically present that was a barrier or messing physically with hormones to prevent conception. Right. And there's nothing physically present to prevent that.
That gets into a really good, kind of segues into a really good misunderstanding around this. People say, one of the questions that I've actually gotten frequently, and it's a very valid question, but it just shows that there's so much misunderstanding about this, that if you're trying to avoid a pregnancy, what's the difference between fertility awareness and actual contraception, right? And it goes back to, Catholic Church understanding that their ends and means matter, right? The means to an end matter. You don't, unjust means do not justify the end. And with fertility awareness, what you're doing is you are learning the way that God designed your body. And last time I checked, pretty sure the church is okay with science. Granted, there's been some propaganda, to the contrary, but the church is very pro, we understand that studying God's creation leads to a greater understanding of God, right? And women who start to learn about you can't deny it. Like when you start to learn how intricately and beautifully this system was designed and how delicate it is, but how refined, hot dang, God's cool. I mean,
I agree.
It's really cool.
Yeah. When I was
learning.
Yeah. It's just it was just fascinating, all of the things. And I'm an instructor. And so when we teach couples and they just have never heard of it before, it's just what? That's how it works? That's incredible. I had no idea. Why don't we teach this in, when girls are 10 to 13 and about to get their first period? Exactly. Why don't we teach this? Exactly. I'm asking that question too, but
fertility awareness should be basic sex ed, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Don't teach kids how to put on condoms. No, teach them how their body works. When you teach someone how their body works, you can't help but have a healthy respect for it. Yeah. When you have a healthy respect for it, you're going to understand what these processes are for. And then you're not going to, you might still, but you're far less likely to abuse it. There was actually some Billings did studies that whenever they introduced fertility awareness to young girls, their rates of promiscuity dropped by 37%.
Yes. It's amazing. Because it's that understanding. Knowledge is power, right? and understanding how the female body works, how the cycle works. And I feel like we're like totally jumping into a whole nother tangent here, but
I know there's so many,
but it creates a full understanding of what sex actually is, because what the world is trying to tell us is, oh, sex is just for pleasure. But when you actually understand how the woman's body works and how that cycle of fertility works, you can't help but understand sex better and realize, oh, wait, no, sex is for two things. It's for babies and bonding. That's my favorite way to say it.
I like that. I like that a lot. The two B's, babies and bonding. But it's, it's written in our fertility. Men are fertile 100% of the time.
Right.
Okay. That's why we don't have to chart them, because it's like, you are always ready to make a kid. Okay. But God did not design women that way. He was like, you are capable of making a child during a very tiny window in a cycle, right? So majority of the time, women are infertile. And this just kind of goes back to like, how can procreation be the primary purpose of marriage if the majority of a woman's cycle is infertile?
I totally agree there. And also, hot take, if procreation is supposedly the only reason for sex, why did God make it feel good?
Well, even more than that, how does that differentiate us from animals?
Yeah.
Because then it becomes purely instinctive. It becomes purely a survival of the species type of thing. Like, I mean, hello, like, I last time I checked, I didn't think we were big fans of Darwin, but maybe I'm wrong. But no, it becomes purely instinctive. It becomes a primal urge, not a response of love. Right. And I frankly, like, I've been very hesitant to try to say this, but 9 times out of 10, when I talk to people who hold the view that procreation is the primary purpose of marriage, it's because they don't believe they should have to abstain. That's like 9 times out of 10. That's what I encounter. And it's really sad, because like self-denial is the cornerstone of the Christian life.
Right.
You do not get sex is not a free-for-all just because you're married. No, it's still a total free gift. And if it's not total, and if it's not free, you don't get to have it. And what I mean by free is you have to be able to say no, even within marriage. This kind of gets into that whole like conjugal rights type of thing, where it's like, you cede bodily rights to each other. That doesn't mean that I have to put out whenever you're in the mood. That means that, your body is mine to love and to cherish, not to abuse, not to use. It is mine to love and to cherish. And kind of everybody loves to take those verses from Paul and just take them out of context. And it drives me crazy, because I'm like, you can't do that with scripture. You cannot do that. That leads to so many problems.
Yes.
You cannot you cede bodily rights out of the context of the gospel call to love, right? And what that means. And if you go to 1 Corinthians 13, what is love? It's patient. It's kind. It bears with one another. It believes one another. It hopes. That's love.
Yeah.
Which is the definition of God. But so if that's what your marriage is supposed to be, then no, I do not owe my husband sex. My husband does not owe me sex. We get to have sex to renew our vows, to show our love, and to deepen our bond, and to be open to children if God wants to give them to us. Right. So it's this, it's just it's the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Either it's all about pleasure or it's all about babies. And you see where both ends of that spectrum is so many problems, because if you remove the unitive or the procreative, it's just a mess. It has to be both, always both.
Exactly.
And it just drives me crazy. But also think about it this way. If procreation was the primary purpose of sex and marriage, it would not be illicit to have sex if you were infertile.
Yeah.
Think about it.
You really good point.
You couldn't get married in later life if you were postmenopausal. Yep. You couldn't have sex when you were pregnant. Now, granted, I know there was a time where that actually was a thing, but it's, that was just a weird thing. We've learned. you couldn't have sex during a woman's infertile period,
Yeah.
right? But also, I mean, like I was thinking about it one day. I was like, what if you took this to like the extreme? If being fertile is the indication that you should be having sex, then like we should be getting married way younger.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
right? Like what?
I don't know, like
11, 13, somewhere in that range, like.
But again, this is where it's faith and reason, right? Like we are given an intellect. Our intellect is a gift, and we're supposed to use it, and we're supposed to employ it, and it's supposed to inform our faith, right? They're
Right.
two sides of the same coin. They're not enemies. They don't work against each other. They're supposed to work in tandem and supposed to help each other, right? Like you have to have, like, there's going to be points where reason falls short, and that's where faith steps in, right? But then that reason comes in to help and inform and bolster the faith. You have to have both. And that's why, fertility awareness, discernment, reason and faith, science and God. I mean, you've got to have both, because we live in a tangible world, but we're made for another one, right? In the world, not of the world, finding that balance. All right. I'm tangenting way too much, but anyway.
I'm just over here like, preach. This is amazing.
Girl, you have no idea what you did when you invited me on this soapbox. Anyway.
This is so great. Okay. So I want to transition over to, and I feel like we've touched just a little bit on it, but I want to hit a home run on this question. Okay, why do some people say you can practice NFP with a birth control mentality?
I have a lot of theories, but I honestly have no idea why, because it's impossible. It's impossible. You can use contraception and have a birth control mentality. You can avoid pregnancy for selfish reasons, but if all you're doing is using abstinence to avoid a pregnancy, it's really hard to maintain that for any period of time if you're doing it for selfish reasons. Okay. Like if you're being selfish about not having another child, you really think you're going to be able to hold the line on not having sex? No. Like,
right.
Just no.
Because it takes a lot of selflessness to abstain when you're fertile, especially if you're in one of those situations where you've got like a long phase 2, or maybe you're postpartum, you've got long stretches of abstinence. Like you have to be so selfless to abstain.
Right. And look, it's like mind games, it's like a war going on in your head. I mean, you're back like in the dating world where you're struggling with chastity and you're just like, no, it's like when you understand that adding another child for whatever reason is not what God wants for you right now, it would not be a loving decision for your spouse, for your living children, or for that child, whatever your situation is. And that's a very valid thing. Yeah. Like that's just not fun. It's just not fun. And then, when you actually do get to have sex, you got like this fear of like, oh my gosh, what if we get pregnant? I mean, you're open to it, but at the same time, I mean, that's just a fact.
Right.
Right. So it sort of sucks the fun out for a lot of people. And it's like, that's one of the biggest pushbacks that people can have with NFP, whatever they say, like, oh, it helps you have the best marriage. It's like, and the best sex life. And I know some people push back. It's like, what sex? Like, what sex are we having right now?
What are you talking about? I'm like 3 months postpartum and haven't had sex yet. Like,
right.
I don't have a sex life, right?
Right. Nothing like childbirth to, put you off having sex again. Anyway. Babe, I love you, but from a distance. Yeah. No, I honestly don't know why. I will say this. I think part of it is that's how NFP has been packaged and sold for a long time within the church. It's just as effective a means as avoiding pregnancy as birth control. So I think that we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot on that front. Yeah. Because I sort of understand where it comes from, but it frankly just annoys the crud out of me because people are so afraid of just talking about NFP for what it is, honestly. Yeah. And I know when I got it pitched in marriage prep, it was as if they were terrified we were going to run out of that door, go to our doctor's office, and just get on hormonal birth control. And so they wanted to paint this rosy picture of NFP. The irony was, when my husband and I had our second surprise pregnancy, we were this close. We were like, screw this. Let's just use condoms. This doesn't work.
Right.
You know, we were told that this was going to be an effective means of planning our family, but we were not given, we had no idea what options we had for methods. Everybody was like, you know, I remember at one point in our marriage prep conference, like the deacon, a married deacon who was like telling us about everything. He was like, oh, abstinence is going to produce the honeymoon effect. And if you can't handle abstinence, it's because you don't love your spouse. And I'm like,
oh.
What? Like,
oh man,
no.
That hits hard.
Well, and I'm like, now I'm looking back and I'm like, okay, yeah, technically selfishness is a lack of love.
Yeah.
But can we just have like a little space to work through that? Because that's kind of the whole point of marriage, you know, like that's why we get married for life, because it takes you that long to work through your own crap.
Exactly.
But no, I mean, it just, I think that they tried to sell it like, oh, you can have just as good a sex as you have on birth control, just as much sex as you have on birth control, but none of the, you know, none of the chemicals, and you can still go receive communion on Sunday and hoo-ah. It's like, I'm sorry, that just doesn't work. Oh, and by the way, they're not having great sex on birth control because birth control kills a woman's libido. Okay.
Yep.
Like, like, no, I talked to so many women who've come off of birth control and use fertility awareness, and they're like, the sex is so much better.
Exactly.
That's a valid point. But at the same time, for somebody like me, who's never been on birth control and was not sexually active until she was married, I have nothing to compare this to.
Sure.
You know, like I don't have this beautiful epiphany moment where it was like I didn't realize I was having bad sex and now I'm having great sex, you know, like, yeah, I don't know. I understand, but it's like, I understand that that's one of the reasons that's used to say don't get on birth control. But if you've never experienced it, it's like, is it really that bad? You know, I mean,
right. It's hard to sell, you know, it's hard to sell something or promote something in one way if somebody hasn't experienced the other side of what you're trying to compare it against. And right. I think that's one of the biggest problems in like promoting NFP within the church is we're trying to compare it to what the world has instead of just laying out the feast that is using fertility awareness and discernment within your marriage.
Right.
Like, why don't we just talk about what that is and stop trying to compare it to what the world has? Because what the world has is crap.
Preach it. No, that's it. That's exactly it. There is no comparison. There is no comparison whatsoever. There's nothing. I mean, it involves sex, but that's where the comparison ends. There's nothing else that is remotely similar. And you're totally right. Like that was the most eye-opening thing to me is like, when you tell people the honest truth, like, here's the deal. You're talking to two adults who are getting married. Okay. If they can't handle the facts of life, shouldn't be getting married. And look, when you get married, you take on a cross, right? That's what you're doing when you're getting married. That cross now has a name, and it is your spouse. Okay. All right. This is like,
I'm imagining Toy Story where Andy writes his name, and I'm like imagining crucifix out and writing Kurt on it.
Yep. Mine's named Nicholas, and my Nicholas is named Emily. So, you know, but it's fine. No, it's that iron sharpens iron type of thing, right? Yeah. When you take two individuals as irreconcilable as a man and a woman and stick them together and say, hey, guess what? You're going to build a life together and love each other with a divine love. You really think that that's going to go smoothly all the time? No. No. And it's not meant to. It's not meant to, because we are selfish sinners. And when you put two selfish sinners together and tell them to love each other with a divine love, we're going to fail at times, you know, and that's okay. That's why we have our faith, because our faith looks at us and says, yes, you are going to fail, and that's okay. Here's confession. Here's communion. Enjoy. Work through it. Here's some prayers. here's, other married couples that you can look to who we have now canonized. Look at their marriages. They went through some stuff too. Okay. Like it's this constant learning process. And our faith has never been uncomfortable with a learning process.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's, it's messy. Don't get me wrong. And that makes some people uncomfortable. I know a lot of people, like with the people who kind of want to go back to that, procreation is the primary purpose of marriage. One of the things that I've kind of felt in these conversations that I've had with them is they're very uncomfortable with the messiness and the gray area of having, not clear-cut reasons to avoid a pregnancy. Yeah. It's something that they struggle with. And I can understand that to a certain point because we're very much about, moral relativism is a big problem, right? But at the same time, you have to, again, reason. You have to understand that marriage, the sacrament, is ancient. My marriage, your marriage, is something completely new because it involves two completely unique individual persons. It's the same rules, but the way the rules are going to play out for us is going to look different because we're two different people. And that absolutely applies to your family planning, right? And so you cannot, if the church came out with a list of definitive rules, she would instantly have to come out with a million exceptions.
Yep.
And what the church has done is she has said, no, you guys are the stewards of your marriage. We are empowering you with this sacrament. It is your responsibility to figure out what is best for your marriage, to love each other. And if you fail in that, or if you struggle in that, it's your responsibility to seek help and to get that sorted out and to surround yourself with good friends and, other people whose marriages can, help inform yours and, that openness to life, but also that openness to understanding that fruitfulness doesn't just come through children, right?
Right.
Come on, how limiting of God is that?
I know, that's
right.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And my partner in the new organization, the 501c3 that I'm starting, Mary, she's infertile. She will never be able to have a child. And this message that, children are the primary way for a married couple to be fruitful has been so damaging for her and millions of women like her, that of course there is space, like you're called to be fruitful. If you cannot be fruitful by having children, that doesn't mean that you're doing marriage wrong,
Oh, yes.
and it's, of course, like it's women who are infertile, it's not their fault. Men who are infertile, it's not their fault.
Right.
And how damaging is that? And there's 12.5% of women are infertile. This is not a small number. And so, I understand that birth control use is very prevalent within the Catholic Church, but we have to understand that if we start doing things like saying this is NFP is birth control, or saying that you're a good Catholic family if you have more than 6 kids, that it's giving such a limited picture. It's doing so much damage. It's causing so much harm. And really what it's doing is it is shoving people away from the practice of NFP entirely. Not giving them answers, not giving them compassion, but just leaving them dry, because as I was saying before, like when we understand something like ovulation is a sign of health, well, then fertility awareness becomes like huge in a woman achieving health and achieving pregnancy. Right. And it's holistic. And our faith is nothing if not holistic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could just keep going.
I honestly think that we could just continue talking about this for the rest of the day, but I think that's a great place for us to just wrap up this episode. Was there anything else that you wanted to add in?
If you got another 30 minutes, which I know you don't. No, I think we nailed it. I hope I answered like what you wanted to answer. I know I took a lot of tangents, but
that's what this podcast is all about. We just go on tangents like every episode.
Then I nailed it. All right, awesome. I think I covered what I wanted to cover. I think that, understanding where this argument comes from, that 1917 versus 1983 issue, and, yeah, like God has such a limitless imagination. He's not limited by anything except our no. That's the only thing that limits God. As long as we say yes, nothing can stand in his way. Nothing. And even the no, he's like, I can still work with that.
Oh man, yes. Let's stop trying to limit God with our own limitations and human faults.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. This was so much fun. And I'm so excited about your new organization. So I'm going to be that along.
Me too. Yeah, I'll keep you posted. And yes, lots of good things. Lots of good things.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed our conversation about why NFP isn't Catholic birth control. If you would like to have some really good basis on what exactly we're talking about theologically, I highly suggest reading Humana Vitae. My husband and I are currently going through it together and just reading each section and discussing it. And it's just so beautifully written and easy to understand for the most part. And it's really not that long. And it has incredible comebacks to any argument against natural family planning. So please give that a read. You can find that on the Vatican website. I will link that in the show notes. Until next time.